Okay, I'm gonna admit everybody right now. Welcome, everybody. We are just letting everybody in. If you can hear my voice, we ask you to turn off your mic so that we don't.
Hi, Jackie. I see you coming in there. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Lovely to see you all.
As always.
Lovely to see you.
I know. I'm looking at this. It's like the romper room. I want to call out all your names as I see you all here. Yeah. Some of you don't remember the romper room.
I do.
Most of us do. Yeah.
I'm
Lovely to see everybody.
Thank you.
Trying to flip through the screens here. Yeah. Great to see you all. Great. I love when you have your faces on. So that's if you can do it, do it. If you can put your face on, it'd be great.
Okay.
Do you mean that some people are coming without their faces?
I know. Or they choose not to show us their faces. I don't know.
maybe they're not dressed.
That's perhaps that exactly right. Or they've got other things going on in the background. Right.
Yeah, right.
I will share with you a funny from our friends in Boca, or JCC in Boca. There was somebody in the bathtub.
Oh my God.
And did they mistakenly have their video on?
I'm not sure if it was a mistake, but
Oh my God.
they were in the bathtub. So that was, it kept everybody interested to watch what was happening.
That's so cute, right? Well, you know what? That's the thing about Zoom. You can multitask, is listen and do something else, I guess. Why not be?
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Great. So we have a nice group today coming, right?
Yes, there's a nice group that registered.
Yeah. So we'll give everybody a few more minutes to come in here.
Okay.
You do realize that sounded like it was a nice group that registered today as opposed to the group that normally registers.
Which is pretty much the same group. So there you go. So it was actually a double compliment. But I did want to point out that Jackie put in the chat already the books through May. Thank you, Jackie, for doing that. That is really great. And that if you want to check out the chat right now, you can see all the books names. And just on a little note here, you can actually do a right click and do a copy paste and send those someplace else. So
A right click.
you do a right click and you can get all of those books, do a big copy paste.
Yeah, I do. But
I have a question about the book for next month. When I went to the library's list, they showed almost only ebooks. There was just one that was not an ebook. I did put a hold on it, but is there not a lot of books for that book? A lot of
Are you
copies?
talking about the best we could do, the book to
Yes.
read for January? Check
Yes.
with the library, actually ask them, because usually the big read, they give us the books. And they've had copies. I got my copy already, and it's great. It's fantastic. The artwork is terrific.
Oh,
So-
maybe that's why there was only ebooks listed. I'll go to the library and do that. Thank you.
I don't know if
got
they have copies. Go ahead.
Yes, I got a complimentary copy from the library and was sort of shocked to learn that it was a graphic novel.
Right.
I'm excited about it. It's great. You guys, the art is fantastic in it. The workmanship is unbelievable.
I know. And it's a wonderful story also. So yeah, I'm going to show you a copy of it. Once we get going, I want to show you. Yeah, I'll show you a sample. Yeah. It's quite different.
At this time, it's 1:35. So I am actually going to do a mute all. So I'm going to mute everybody's microphone, and then we're going to get started. Okay, so at this time, I think everybody should be, we have you on mute. This is Debbie Hockman. I'm the Director of Arts, Culture, and Education at the David Posnack JCC, and happy to welcome you to my favorite monthly program with our partners at Friends of the Sterling Road Library. And we are presenting the lovely Lynda Levin and her wonderful book discussion. This month, of course, is a Book of Lost Names written by Kristen Harmel. And this is supposed to be an interactive program. And Lynda and I have been talking about how great, you know, it's been almost 2 years we've been doing this together virtually, but it is great because so many of you keep coming on every month that I think we've hit a pretty great stride in terms of you guys understanding like how to interact with undoing your mic or raising your hand or those type of things, because it really makes it such a wonderful program when we hear your comments and how you felt about the book. So we encourage you to do that. If it's your first time with us, what we do is typically you can either use the raise hand option, or you can try to time your comment and just unmute yourself. The one thing that we're going to ask you though is once you've made your comments or been part of the conversation, just remute, because it is the other noise coming in does make a difference for everybody else's enjoyment. So we just want it to be a good experience for everybody. And talking about good experiences, I'm going to turn it over to Lynda, who's going to talk about this book and also the next month's book. The registration is not up yet for next month, but it should be before the end of the week. So anyway, I'm going to turn it to Lynda.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. So glad to see everybody. If you're new, we welcome you. We're so happy you're joining our group. And as Debbie said, the best part of this group is that we really want it to be as interactive as possible. Okay. Having said that, let's begin. And I want to just point out to you about our next selection, because we started talking about it before perhaps some of you came on. But our next selection, and I'm going to hold the book up for you, is The Best We Could Do. Okay. And what's interesting about it is that it is a graphic novel. So it's a different format than we're used to reading. And I just want to give you a sample page to show you. I don't know if you can see it so well, but the artwork is wonderful and the story is very poignant. Okay. And I'll just read to you very briefly from the back of the book. It says here, The Best We Could Do is a debut graphic novel memoir by T. Bui. And it's an intimate look at one family's journey from their war-torn home in Vietnam to their new lives in America, exploring the anguish of immigration and the lasting effects that displacement has on a child and her family. Bui documents the story of her family's daring escape after the fall of South Vietnam in the 1970s and the difficulties they faced building new lives for themselves. And I'll tell you, one of the wonderful comments in the front of the book is it says it's a book to break your heart and heal it. And I think that's exactly, Jackie's nodding yes, because she's already finished it. So she agrees with that. So I think this is something to look forward to reading this month. Okay. February, we've got, it's funny, it's a similar title, The Book of Lost Friends. Okay. We did the Lost Names this month and we're doing the Book of Lost Friends. That's by Lisa Wingate, who also, I believe, as I recall, was she the author of Before We Were Yours, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we already enjoyed that one together as a group, so I know we will enjoy this one as well. And as the future books, thank you, Jackie, for listing those in the chat. So moving on, I do want to begin by telling you a little background about the author. Okay, Kristen Harmel is the New York Times bestselling. She's actually an international bestselling author. She wrote, of course, our book today, The Book of Lost Names. Her newest book that came out is The Forest of Vanishing Stars. People that have read that have really enjoyed that one also. She also wrote The Winemaker's Wife and a dozen other novels that have been translated into 29 languages and are sold all over the world. She's a former reporter for People magazine, and she started writing for them while she was still in college and then continued at People for 10 years. She tells us that she actually was born outside of Boston and spent her childhood there, as well as in Ohio and St. Petersburg, Florida. She graduated with a degree in journalism from the University of Florida, spent some time living in Paris and Los Angeles, and she now lives in Orlando with her husband and her son. She's also, interestingly enough, the co-founder and co-host of a weekly web show and podcast called Friends and Fiction. It's an online program, a community that features authors and their books in a Facebook live show. And she says it's for people who love books. So if you're interested in that, we do have additional information about that. In the author's notes, the author tells us how this book, the Book of Lost Names, came to be. In researching her last book, what she began to wonder was about who were these people that were so skilled that they were able to provide the false papers that saved so many. And she began to research who were these forgers during World War II. And then, incidentally, on another occasion, she saw an article in the newspaper about the Nazis having looted all of these libraries and the efforts that were now being made to return them to their rightful owners. And when she put those two ideas together, she thought that would be a wonderful basis for a novel. I saw one interview as I was doing my research in preparation for today, where she shared some of the documents that were very helpful to her in writing the story. And she held up, actually, on this online podcast, she actually held up one of the documents that was a Nazi travel document taken from an Israeli museum. But it was actually from December of 1940. And it was giving evidence of how difficult it was for the forgers to come up with the correct paper, the texture of the paper, and how difficult it was to produce the false stamps. And she also held up a copy of the Journal Officiel, which was from August 1944. She says, and if you remember from the story, that was the newspaper that printed everything about what happened legally. And therefore, from that information, the forgers could garner information about births and deaths and weddings, and it was important to establish a real paper trail for the false identities. In that same interview, she explained that the code that she talks about in this book was actually totally fictional. There never was that kind of code. However, the Fibonacci math sequence that she describes is in fact true. And what also is real is the book itself. This book, dated from 1732, she actually owns a copy of this religious text. But of course, the idea of the code inside the book is purely fictional. The author does tell something that I thought was actually, for me, the most important part of this whole interview that I heard. And that was about how she developed the character of Eva. Eva was loosely based on a real forger by the name of Adolfo Kaminsky. He was a teenager that ultimately saved thousands of Jewish lives. They say as many as 14,000 lives were saved by him because of his forgery skills. Harmel said in another interview that Kaminsky was very young and he worked on a dairy farm a few years before, and he learned that lactic acid was able to erase indelible ink. That made it he was a very important member of the forgery team for that reason. In the author's notes, she also names other famous forgers, including Oscar Rosowski, who saved at least 2,500 lives, as well as women forgers who worked beside the men. The author says she was fascinated by the whole process of forgery, how they did it, and therefore she includes lots of details in the book to make that world as real as possible for those of us that are readers. Just to refresh your memory, in terms of summary, the book begins in 2005. We meet Eva Traub Abrams. She's a semi-retired librarian living in Florida. She's shelving books. And one morning while she's at work, her eyes fall on a photograph in a magazine that's lying nearby. And she realizes it's a photograph of a book that she hasn't seen in 65 years. And it's a book that she used to call the Book of Lost Names. The article next to the photograph discusses the looting of libraries by Nazis across Europe during World War II. And now there's this current search to reunite people with the texts that had been stolen so many years before. The book in the photograph, an 18th century religious text, was thought to have been taken from France in the waning days of the war. And now, according to the article, it's a very fascinating story because they're wondering all about this book. It's now in Central Berlin's library. And this particular book contains some kind of code, and the researchers not only don't know whose it is, but they don't know anything about this code, what it means. Well, it turns out that Eva holds the answer. The question, of course, in the story is she going to have the strength to revisit old memories and reclaim the book that once was so dear to her? And of course, using flashbacks, we have another chapter. The ensuing chapter tells us that as a graduate student in 1942, she is forced to flee Paris after the arrest of her father, a Polish Jew. She finds refuge with her mother in a small mountain town in the Free Zone, and she begins the process of forging identity documents. And she does this for a lot of people, for wounded pilots, for resistance members, but also for many, many Jewish children who are fleeing to neutral Switzerland. She works alongside a handsome forger by the name of Remy, with whom she falls in love. The idea of changing the names of these children who are too young to remember who they are haunts her. And she decides she wants to preserve their names. And so she comes up with this idea of writing their names in code in this religious text. And of course, she does that with Remy. The two of them do this together. And the question always is, in this kind of a book, who do you trust in times of war? And in the end, they end up trusting the wrong person. The resistance cell is betrayed. And in the chaos of the aftermath of the war, Remy and Eva are separated. The book of lost names is lost too. And the losses of all of these things now are so painful for Eva. But now she's faced with this possibility of retrieving the book. And she decides, even if it's 63 years later, she is willing to go to Berlin and face the past. Okay, so you remember our characters. We have Remy, we have Eva. We meet her mother, who she refers to as Mamusha. And we meet her crush. She has a crush as a young girl on Joseph Pelletier, and he's not the man that she thought he was. We know that. We meet Geneviève, the beautiful forger, who falls in love with Joseph only to be murdered by him in the end. And of course, we've got the wonderful character of Père Clement, in whose church the secret library has become the forgery lab for the resistance fighters in the area. Okay, so that's the background. Now it's your turn. Let's begin with the question. First of all, what would you say are the overarching themes in the book that struck you? What would you say? Well, obviously, forgery. What else?
At the end, betrayal.
Betrayal, for sure. Yeah. What
That
else?
she's saving so many people.
The heroism of it all,
forgery.
right? She's saving so many
Right.
people. Yeah. What else?
Religion.
Religion.
Mixed relationships of different religions.
Uh-huh.
I agree with Jillian. I think betrayal is a big one, but I also think trust and love is huge in this book.
Yeah.
Huge in this book.
And-
Trust and
and-
love. Dar?
Survival is a very important thing, how they
Yeah.
manage to get through so many difficult situations.
Right. And I saw so much sacrifice in the book as well, right? People that were willing to sacrifice so much. Did you like the way that the author told the story in looking at the style? Were you engaged by her writing? Did you like the idea of the flashbacks? Why do you think she decided to write this book using the idea of flashback chapters?
Lynda, before you go along, I just want to say courage was put in there as well as conflicting
Yes.
loyalties. And
Absolutely. What thoughts do you want to share about style, the style of writing? Were you engaged?
It was gripping. It kept you engaged from every single page. It just pushed you forward. It was a very easy read. It was
Yeah.
a compelling read.
Right. It was an easier read and yet compelling. Yes.
I think it also, when you do the flashbacks like that with this kind of history, it makes you realize that survival is possible, but it was still very difficult. So I liked the flashbacks in this case.
Right. I agree with you, Jackie. Yeah. Jillian?
I did like the flashbacks. Usually I don't, but it wasn't so often. But the thing is, though, I don't think she followed up at the end with her son, Ben. That bothered me, because he really didn't know anything about her life. And it was surprising. And we do hear a lot of survivors, and I have read a lot of books where the children of survivors had no idea. I think I can't remember which,
About the
many
past.
of the books,
Yeah.
many of the World War II books, and the heroes don't let their children know about their past lives. But so I was surprised she didn't follow through with
That
that.
she didn't, yeah. I want to talk about the ending later too, because I think there are a lot of questions about the ending. But I want to talk about what you're talking, Eva, I'm going to call her contemporary Eva, the 2005 Eva, okay? As opposed to the 1942. And by the way, I liked those flashback chapters because I thought it highlighted the differences in who she was, right? We really saw two different people almost, because I want to talk about who was this woman that we meet in 2005? How did she see herself as opposed to, of course, what we're going to see when we talk about how she was in 1942? But what do we know of her in 2005? I mean, physically, she describes herself as very small. She's got white hair. I figured out mathematically she's about 86 because they go back with, was it 63 years, 65 years, you know, whatever, since she was in the war, but she's about 86. So first of all, how do other people look at her? It's 2005. How do people look at her?
I mean, it's a big deal to get on a plane at 86 all by yourself without even hardly telling your family what's going on.
Right. And I did love that part because it showed that there was still that spark in her of who she was, right? She still had a little bit of that in her. But how do other people see her now in 2005?
I think other people see her as wife, mother, grandmother. I think other people see her like most of us see older adults. They're just kind of there. And what they don't realize, and I thought that was hysterical with Ben, is there's a whole life behind these people. They didn't just pop out old and with gray hair and no history. There's so much there. And I thought that was one of the most endearing parts of it, was how confused Ben was, because I could see that. It's like, what is this with my mom? But I think everybody saw her as kind of an old doddering woman.
That's right. And what I loved the comment that you said about how, you know, as you get older, people don't really even realize who you were in your youth. And she comes up with this line. Eva at one point says, one's reward for marching through the decades is a gradual process of erasure. Right? And people say that as you become older, you become more invisible. So that's really it. I love the librarian in the beginning, the young librarian that works with her. Remember, she says, what do you like? Why are you still working? You know, she thinks she should be home. And by the way, you guys are forgetting the fact that Ben actually thinks his mother's ready for assisted living, right? That's how he sees her. And here she's ready to get on a plane to Berlin.
Hello.
And, by the way, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think she's a much stronger character portrayed at the end. In the beginning, there's a lot of times when she just is so unsure of herself and she thinks she did the wrong thing and made the wrong decisions. I kind of wanted to slap her a few times, but at the end, she's determined. She goes there and she's determined. And I wanted to tell you that, I was going to tell you that she definitely is 86. It says it at the first few pages.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Right.
Good. And I love the fact that at the end, she says to her son, when Ben says to her, Mom, it's too much for you. You know, I'm going to go with you. She says, okay, to get him off her back. She finally says, okay, I'll change my schedule. And what does she do? Do you remember what she does? She does change it. She flies out sooner. She changes it and makes it sooner rather than changing it according to his schedule. And I love her line there. She says, I didn't really lie to him. Truth is in the nuances. I thought that really, it gave us a little insight into her character. You know, you guys touched on the idea that she didn't share her past with the family. So we do know that really was, I think Jillian pointed out, that is a very common story, that people very often didn't share their past. In this particular case, why else did she not share her past?
Maybe because she was in love with someone other than his father.
Well, okay.
That would be one thing.
Yeah, so she didn't want to tell that part of the story, perhaps, for sure. What else? If you want to say something, go ahead and unmute yourself or send in your chats.
Well, I think the religious problem was a problem for her. The fact that Remy was not Jewish and she felt like she was betraying her mother.
Right.
And her father was very good about it, but the mother was, she's another one I wanted to slap.
Okay. Well, we're going to have a nice discussion about Mamusha. Yeah, okay. Right. But I think that part of it was that, first of all, it was also painful that she didn't want to bring up the past. She wanted to start fresh. And that was a very important thing to her. And remember, now we know that she's widowed now from having been married to Louis for 10 years, and now she's widowed. And she actually says one of the reasons she didn't share her past was she didn't want Louis to leave her. She was fearful that if he realized that she was not the person that she wanted him to see, she was afraid he would leave. And as for Ben, why doesn't she share with Ben, her son? She says he's a lot like his father. He, quote, cares too much about success and too little about the things that we can find in our hearts. So she thinks that his personality is such that she doesn't really feel she can share with him. And I really, at the end of one of that chapter, I think she says, he cannot understand her desire to now go to a country that she has no connection to. So he really has no idea of what her connection really is to the past. Let's talk a little bit about that past. Before we talk about the characters individually, let's talk about 1942 Paris. Let's talk about the setting in the time period. And we learn about Eva's background. We learn about her parents, her father, their lifestyle, relationship with the neighbors. So I'll start us out. It's Paris, 1942. Everybody has to wear a yellow star if you are Jewish. What about her father? What do we know about her dad in those days, her father? Do you remember?
He repaired typewriters?
He typewriter
Exactly.
repair.
And what happened about his job?
He lost his job.
He lost his job. He wasn't allowed to work in government offices anymore. And so he lost his job. He had a very kind boss who sort of paid him off the books, and he gave him he was able to do that, which was wonderful. What else do we know? What about the neighbors? 1942 Paris, neighbors.
Terrible, very anti-Semitic.
Very anti-Semitic.
They asked for a favor for them to watch, which actually saved Eva and her mother.
Yes, Madame Fontaine.
Yes, but she quickly took over their apartment as soon as they left, like within weeks. And she was just nasty about the whole thing.
Right.
Even after she came back, she didn't thank them or anything. She just was like.
So, right. So picture this sense of not trusting your neighbors, not knowing where to turn at that point. And there's all these rumors of roundups, right? So what is their reaction when they hear about the rumors of roundups? Joseph comes and he tells Eva, he says, listen, you should go hide with your parents. There's going to be a roundup tonight, 20,000 Jews. So what's the reaction?
Initially, they didn't believe them.
They don't believe him. They really don't believe it. How could that be possible? We're productive citizens. How can that be possible? Well, of course, yeah.
They also
At the same time, they don't believe the rumors, but what does her father do at the same time?
he prepared with I think it was a police or somebody who worked, he prepared papers and
his boss, yeah.
He paid him to take care of Eva, not the wife, but Eva.
Exactly, to prepare false documents, to have false documents, exactly. So on the one hand, they don't believe it. On the other hand, he is secretly thinking he and his wife might get arrested because after all, they're Polish immigrants to France, but their daughter is purely French. Why would she ever be endangered? What do we know about Eva herself? We know she's a student. Anything else you want to say? I think it was Leslie. Did you say she was very unsure at this stage of the game? She's not sure what to do with what's going on at this time. She's still going to university. She's hoping she's still going to get a degree, even though it's doubtful because she's a Jew. What else do we know about her?
She's innocent.
Go ahead, what?
I was saying she's very innocent. She didn't have experience as far as romance was concerned.
Right, just a little crush on Joseph, who's film star handsome, and we know that. But we know that she's actually, what's her reaction when her father is taken? Besides horror and sadness, what else is her reaction? Do you remember? She's feeling tremendous guilt. Yes, guilty. So guilty.
Well, no, she also heard though that they were asking for the daughter. Like she was peeking out the door when they took the father, and she didn't believe that they would take her because she was French. But when they asked for her, the mom couldn't believe it either, you know, because the mom said, "You're not Polish, you're French." So she was shocked when that happened.
So in other words, nationality didn't really mean anything. They were just really after, at that time, they were just looking for anyone who was Jewish at that point. So they go to Monsieur Goujon. She goes to the boss, who's very kind. And what does he say to her at that point? Do you remember? He says to her, I want to help you. I was prepared to help you.
But he's afraid for his family.
He was, and why was he so afraid to give documents for the mother? Do you remember? In the end, he was right too, because her accent gave her away, right? That's what it, yes, so he was afraid, and it would come back to his family. By the way, it also, as I read that, it makes you respect and admire with such intensity the idea of the righteous Gentile, the people who really did risk their lives, because they really, as Monsieur Goujon says, he was really risking his entire family. And so, but what does he do? So he doesn't do everything that she wanted him to do. He doesn't give her the false documents, but he does something very important. What does he give her?
Papers.
The supplies.
He gives
And
her
the
all the
supplies.
supplies.
Stamps.
Yeah. He gives her the art pens. He gives her this adhesive stamps that she would have not gotten otherwise. And he gives her all the supplies. And he says, listen, your father always said you were a gifted artist. This is your chance to utilize those skills. But he also gives her something else important. And he gives her a tip.
Does he tell her to go to the town?
He tells her to go to this town south of Vichy. It's still in the free zone. And of course, not only is she afraid of the Nazis at this time, not only is she afraid of even her neighbors at this time, but what's she got going on with her mother?
She's afraid of her mother.
Her mother is so angry with her. How could you not be wanting to save your father? Get down to the police station, get your father. And her response is very realistic. Hey, we've got to save ourselves, and then we can save father. And that's how she's approaching him. But she really changes once she gets to this free zone. Let's talk about the changes. How does she change, and why does she change? Remember, her idea is she's going to get there. She's going to forge the papers. She's going to get her father, go back and get her father out. And then she and her mother and her father are going to go to Switzerland. But all of that changes when she gets there. What do you think does it?
Well, reality, she goes to find out about her father, and they said he's gone already.
Okay, what else?
She sees how useful she can be in helping to save so many people.
She realizes that's right. She's a master forger, and she realizes that how useful she can be. And of course, she's so influenced by the people that she meets, the people that are risking their lives. Madame Barbier, who's the proprietress of the pension, right? And all the bookseller, and of course, Père Clement, the pastor, whose church is a major stopover. And he's the one who really is a very important person in this whole resistance and for fleeing Jews and others. So she makes a deal with him, right? With the pastor, with Père Clement. And that is that he's going to give her papers that hopefully are going to help free her father. And she's going to do some forgery. But even beyond that, her mother is pressing to leave, insistent on leaving, and yet she doesn't. So why not? After she realizes her father is not going to be freed, that he's already been sent to Auschwitz, what keeps her there?
Her commitment. She's made a commitment already.
She's made a commitment. What else? Well, for starters, first of all, how about the idea that the priest has really been very instrumental in influencing? He says to her, I would rather die knowing that I had done the right thing than knowing I would live if I turned my back. So you see where those are exact words that later she uses about herself. And she's so influenced by him. Anything else that influences her to stay?
Probably Remy.
Remy, for sure. Remy. And then there's one other thing that really influences her. Remember? Where does the priest take her?
Actually, I was
The
going to say, actually
children.
meeting the kids. She
Right,
met
that's
the kids.
good.
Yeah, he takes her to meet the children, the faces, the people behind the names that she's forging. And once she makes those relationships and she visits those children all the time, we know that that she realizes the importance of her work. Now, picture what's going on with her mother at this time. She is now leaving her mother back at the boarding house. The mother is having to clean there, right? And she's going off and she's doing this forgery. What is mother's reaction to this whole thing? How did you feel about mother? How is she responding to everything?
She's difficult.
Mother was
Beverly?
horrified.
Yeah.
Mother
Yeah,
was,
you could only see her the loss of her husband more than anything else.
yeah.
Okay.
And
What
and
else?
She feels her daughter's leaving the Jewish religion and becoming closer to the church.
He's worried about that. Joyce, did you have a comment?
Totally self-centered, everything from her perspective.
That's
Nothing,
right.
no concept of the whole story picture.
I think
Yeah.
she felt betrayed.
Okay.
I think the author used her as a total contrast to Eva, because she was so giving. She became so giving and so natural in doing what she did and realizing what good she was doing. And there was the mother who was so self-indulgent and selfish. I kept saying, why are you in the house? She did clean a bit, but why isn't she out there helping? And all she did was blame her daughter for things that her daughter had no control over. I found her incredibly awful.
Incredibly awful. I know people were so angry with her, so irritated with her, and I was too. But I also had a lot of sympathy for her. Does anybody feel like I did? And I'll tell you why.
I agree about that too. I
Yeah.
thought that I couldn't stand her, and I read this book twice and I didn't like her any better in either one. But I don't think she was blaming the daughter, Beverly, as much as she was just blaming. It's like if you hit your finger with a hammer, you know it's not whoever's fault it is standing next to you, but you blame them anyway. So I think she was just reaching out to because she was so upset. I hated her, but I think that's what her motivation was.
So I think one of the things that's that's very interesting about the mother is that if you remember in the very beginning, I'm sorry, can you guys hear my phone? It's unplugged and I don't know why it's still ringing. Okay.
A nice ring.
Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad. Oh, good. But I want you to remember about this mother. What happened with Madame Fontaine in the very beginning of the story when we meet her? She comes to the door. They answer the door. This woman, a virulent anti-Semite, is desperate. Nobody else is answering their door, and she needs someone to watch her kids. What does the mother say, Mamusha? What's her answer? She says, "Yes, I'll watch your children." And Eva even says, "Don't you remember this woman is so awful to us?" And she says, "Listen, half of Paris feels the same way. But if we shrink away from them, if we lose our goodness, we become like them and we let them erase us, and we cannot do that." So you see that she has innate kindness in her, right? The mother. So I actually felt, and let me know if you would think, I think she was human. Her husband was taken away from her. She was in shock. She was very dependent, obviously, on the husband. And she is feeling abandoned by her daughter. I think she just becomes very human. Maybe her reaction is human.
She was lost. She was lost.
She was lost.
With what you're saying, Lynda, in the very end, if my memory is correct, she says when she's dying how proud she was of her daughter.
Yes.
It's a complete reversal.
Complete reversal. And so she's really angry at her daughter. She feels that her daughter has abandoned her, that her daughter has decided to align herself with strangers instead of looking after her father and not even caring about her mother. And of course, she's upset about this relationship that she sees growing with Remy. And she's saying, you care more for the children that you're saving than for your own mother. I suppose you'll forget me as easily as you've forgotten your father. So maybe that's a human response, as awful as it is. And I agree with you. I was so irritated and annoyed by her, but I kind of understood it. And then, of course, at the end, after she and her daughter have this explosive argument at the end, all of a sudden the author says her face changed. Her anger was replaced by sadness. And all of a sudden at the end, if you remember in their last encounter, when Eva comes and says, Mother, Joseph's going to take you to Switzerland. We're going to meet up again in Switzerland. We'll meet in Geneva. She's so angry with her daughter. And yet, finally, she says to her daughter, I love you. And they're able to say that to each other. And they are able to reconcile at that point. And then at the end, of course, as Jane is pointing out, what happens at the end? She will not betray her daughter, no matter what. And she would rather face execution, which is what happens. And her last words are, I am so proud of my daughter and her bravery.
Lynda, I'd like to say something.
Sure.
The mother, when you think back, what kind of a life did she have? Her whole life was her family, and she was so devoted really to her daughter and to the husband. Eva had other things in her life, and the mother didn't have, and I don't think, she was being so self-centered. I think it was her feelings. She lost her husband, and that was just such an important part of her life.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. We have to remember who we're talking about here and what her past was like. And don't forget, somebody else once pointed out to me when I was discussing this book, she herself had already immigrated from another country. So she knew what, she had suffered a lot in her life before, even before all of this happened. Moving on to talk about Remy, I thought he was, yeah.
One of the things that I think that we all forget is a lot of people, even now, when they've had a loss, they feel guilty feeling happy or finding things that make them happy or good in goodness. She realizes that there's no nationalism. It doesn't matter that you're French. It only matters if you're Jewish. We learn that by what we learned from them. But a lot of times, like the survivor guilt, it's the same thing, when you don't feel you deserve to have been spared, you don't feel you deserve to be happy in any way because you had such sadness. And I think you said it, she's human. And she's sad, afraid, bitter, alone. Those are terrible things when you don't have even one thing that you can think of that's positive.
Right. And you know what else, Lynda, that you're so right with that. And she really sees this whole thing as even the idea of losing their names. She sees it as erasure. She sees it as the destruction of all these families. She's seeing that around her. And even the names are not going to be salvaged, according to Mamusha, right? So she feels that way. And she also feels that her daughter is betraying her faith. And what she's seeing is not only is her daughter being, losing her daughter, but also this whole idea of Jews losing their faith and losing who they are. So she sees all this destruction around her. So I found her a bit of a more sympathetic character when I thought a little deeper about her, when I got over my initial annoyance. So I do understand that.
Lynda, there's a quote. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There's a quote from the book that I found poignant. It was on page 166, and it said, parents make all sorts of errors because our ability to raise children is always colored by the lives we lived before they came along. And that resonated with me. And I can see it's both from the mother and the daughter's point of view.
Right. Especially because of the life that she lived too before her daughter came along. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That was powerful. Moving on to talk about Remy. How would you describe him? I found him a wonderful character. Which scenes did you particularly like that indicated his character? Well, we know he was a talented forger, not as good as she was, but he was still a good forger. Go ahead.
I love the way he was introduced, the fact that he was saving her and he kissed her and pretended to be her husband.
That was a great scene.
Great scene.
Yeah.
I think I could see Clark Gable playing that part because I just recently saw The Misfits and I saw what kind of a character he was in that.
Right, right. But coming in to save the day, and he's the one who he supplies when she's questioned by the German soldier on the train. Remember that scene in the very beginning? And he comes over and oh, darling, here. Oh, wait. Oh, you need more documents? Here, I've got your library card. I've got your student ID, right? And he's able to back up her story. So he sort of saves the day at that point. What else do we know about Remy? What else?
Much.
Well, I loved how sensitive he was. First of all, when he realizes that she feels so deeply about saving the names of these children, that he actually goes ahead and stays up all night coming up with a code to be able to save the names of the children in the book. So he's the one who comes up with the code using that Fibonacci sequence. And I also love that he knew that she had such an affinity for that little girl, Anne, the 6.5-year-old girl. Remember that? He insists on being the courier to take her to safety in Switzerland. So he's very sensitive to her, as well as the fact that he's doing everything that he can to save France, right? He wants to do more and more, even when it means risking his own life. Anything else about him that struck you?
He's a good kisser.
Yes, she did like that very much. And
No,
yeah.
The thing is, at the end where he leaves a special code, he leaves a book for her, the Huckleberry Finn. Like he leaves codes.
Yeah.
He leaves
Right.
messages for her, which is very nice.
Exactly. He's so caring. He remembers that book was very meaningful to her father, and she mentions that, and he finds a copy of that book. I really also was very respectful of him in that, if you remember, there was a scene, they were together in the lab and it was night, and they're together, and you really think that they're going to make love for the first time, and she's more than willing. He pulls away from her. Do you remember that scene? He says, I don't want to let anybody else down. I won't be able to live with myself. He doesn't want to hurt her. So why does he pull away? He's a complicated guy in a way. Why? Why is he conflicted? He wants a future with her, but he also knows he's got another mission in his life, right? He knows that he's going to be leaving. He's going to be risking his life, and he doesn't want to hurt her. So he does pull away. And the other thing I thought was any other comments before I go on? Well, I also thought after their night together at the border, remember they're in that cabin, and he asks her to marry him. They start talking about marriage, and he sees that she's very reluctant and hesitant. And his response is, he says, I understand. Your mother would never approve. He says, I know that family means everything. And right now, your family is broken. I cannot ask you to spend your life with me until your mother understands. I can't cost you the last of your family. So he really understands how broken everything is in her life, and he doesn't want to add to that. And of course, he promises. Yeah.
Do we know how he became a righteous Gentile? Do we know anything about his background?
So what we do know is that he lost his parents very, very young. And he feels very strongly that France needs to, that the French people need to do what they can, not just relying on the British, not just relying on the United States. They need to take the fight to the Germans, and that's why he joins the resistance in the first place. Yeah. Right. That's the little bit of the background that we know about him. Okay, so were you surprised that Joseph was the traitor?
Yes.
No,
I was going to
yes?
say, not in the least. I knew from the very beginning he was a butt.
Did you? Reba?
Yeah.
You were.
I was surprised. I was not expecting that.
You were surprised. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I think he was.
You know, it's interesting. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think he was too smooth right from the beginning. If Remy was charming, somebody said in the chat, Joseph was even more charming, to the point of syrup. He was going to take care of her mother, and he was just too smooth an operator. And that's what he ended up being, an operator.
He reminded me of the wealthy landowners in the old cowboy movies. You know, I've come for the rent. I've come for the rent. I mean, I don't have the rent. He was bad news. I mean, my antenna went up immediately when he came on.
Yeah, I agree.
And you know, when you go back and I reread the book in preparation for today, I could see a lot of the lines. He was actually giving himself away at different points. He says to Eva at one point, we're all pretending to be something we're not. In times like these, I think there's no other way to live with ourselves. So he's already, you know, making his own compromises, and he's sort of letting her know that. And when Remy is arrested, do you remember this? When Remy is arrested, Joseph goes to her and he says, listen, Remy is probably giving you up right now as we speak. He's being tortured and he's probably giving you up. And she says, oh no, Remy would never give me up. And Joseph says, oh, it's impossible to ever really know anyone. After all, Eva, you're not the same girl you were in Paris. People change. And of course, he's speaking of himself. Let me ask you another thing. Why do you think it was so important to Eva that the children's real names be recorded in this book of lost names? Why? What was so important about that?
Well, the whole theme is being erased. Her mother was afraid of being erased. Everybody was being afraid of, you know, being erased.
Absolutely.
They should know their roots, that they are Jewish, and be hopefully reunited with their families. But that's the saddest thing, was that the book was stolen and no one ever, you know, was able to reunite. I mean, even if it wasn't true, but it's a true book, but like, it was sad that, you know, this book was recovered so many years later, you know, that they weren't able to be.
It also, I think it also speaks to that their parents weren't erased. Their parents gave them a name, and being Jewish, it was named after somebody. And I think maybe her ultimate goal was, if they found their name, like you said, they would find some family, or at least, you know, imagine what their life was with their parents.
Lynda, may I?
Yeah.
I was going to say that there's a quote in there that I think really addresses all of this. There actually were a lot of good quotes where she says, we aren't defined by the names we carry or the religion we practice or the nation whose flag flies over our heads. We're defined by who we are in our hearts, who we choose to be on this earth. And I think that kind of flies in the face of that you have to know who you are and where you came from. It's who you are now inside, I think. I thought that was a great quote.
A beautiful quote. Beautiful.
And when you think of lost names, she was lost for 69 years. Look who she hid from the world. She hid her own background. And when she found the book, she also found herself. So I mean, so there was revelation throughout.
Right. The whole idea of loss, it just continued. Right. Yes. Exactly.
As you're discussing this, it's reminding me of something that just happened in my family. And that's my granddaughter decided to change her name. Her name was Pearl. She was named after my mother. And she changed her name to Forrest. And it really bothered me. And I'm starting to understand why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea is, you know, she in this story is haunted by her mother's words, who will remember us, who will care. They are erasing us and we are helping them by getting false names. And so the whole idea of being remembered is so important. And by the way, just as a little aside, you know, when you start to, I could understand, the author was asked, why does she keep writing books about World War II? And she said, what happens is when you start to research, you kind of go down a rabbit hole. There's one story that leads to another. So of course I had the same experience. I'm going to just tell you very quickly, a true story. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the name Irina Sandler. Anybody? Yes, nod if you know the name. Yeah. Between 1942 and 1943, she's a real life Polish woman, Irina Sandler. She had a network of co-compatriots that rescued 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto. She and the other women disguised themselves as infection control nurses. And they went door to door in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they tried to convince parents and grandparents to give up their children so they could be smuggled to safety outside of the ghetto. Each child that was rescued was given a new Polish name, forged identity papers, and hidden in foster homes, orphanages, and convents. Sandler insisted that lists of the children's real names be kept, documenting their Jewish and Polish names so that after the war, they would know their original identities and hope, of course, they could be reunited with their families. She hid the lists in milk jars that were buried in the backyard of one of her co-conspirators. So that's a true life story. Of course, I continued reading on. Irina Sandler, unfortunately, she was able to dig up these milk jars. The children's names were there, but unfortunately their parents did not survive for the most part. But there are many children that were rescued by her. So and they're the ones that have given the testimony about this story. So I thought that was really, really kind of interesting to share with you guys. But there was another reason, by the way, in this story. Why is it, in addition to the children's names being coded in there, why else is it that this book of lost names was so important? And I think Jillian hit on it in the beginning, but why is it that this book, what other purpose did it serve?
I haven't spoken earlier. I really
Glad
think
to hear from you. Glad to hear from you. Yeah.
I read the book a long time ago, so it's kept bringing things back. But I feel by recording the Jewish name somewhere, that the Jewish people don't lose people. We are such a small percentage of the world. And by losing all those children to another religion, just think of one person marries and has family and has more family, how many more people, Jewish people, could survive or be part of the our fold. And right. I really think that that was one of the reasons to try to save those names, to maybe bring them and find, as you say, family, if it's not their own personal family, but cousins or aunts or uncles.
To find them, yeah.
Find them and welcome them back to being
right. Jews. Exactly, keep them within their families, exactly right. But there was another reason too, and that was the fact that this was a way that they communicated with each other. In the very beginning, he says to her, you kind of get the feeling that they're starting to feel something for each other. He says, he shows her the code and he says, on page 1, that will be your page. No other name will be on there. And she says to him, on page 2, there will be no other name except for yours. And if you remember, they're able to kind of communicate that way. He leaves a code for her on there. It says, I will return to you. She finds that code. And later, of course, she's able to leave a coded message. I love you. Marry me. Of course, he never does see that because the book had been looted, but that was one way that they kept in touch with each other. You guys have all pointed out the idea of names and identity and how in the end, the names were not all that, it did not signify who they were. As you said, we're not defined by the names that we carry or the religion. I love that line that we practice, or the nations whose flag flies over our heads. And she learns that our identity is defined by who we are in our hearts and who we choose to be on this earth. And I think that comes through so clearly when you think about who was the bad guy in the story. It was Joseph. And who ended up being a good guy that was shocking?
Eric, the German.
Eric,
the Nazi
soldier. Turns out to be this really good guy who in the end actually saves her life. Mm-hmm. And is trying to save Père Clément and is a really good guy. And he turns out to really risk his own life, actually take his own life at the end in order to save her. Yeah. At the end, why does she not give her name when she finds out about Yad Vashem and she calls them and she gives them the names of the children that she can recall off the top of her head? And they say, well, what's your name? You were really a hero, but she won't give her name. Why not? How's she feeling? How's she feeling? Is she feeling like a hero after all of this? I see you all shaking your head. No.
She hasn't even told her own family her story.
Because why? Why?
Well, I think too, when you listen to anybody who talks about they're being called a hero, even now for one life, most people
Right.
don't consider themselves heroes. I think they're more embarrassed about the notoriety.
Yeah, possibly, yes. I think it's true. I think that's true. Real heroes don't need that kind of acclaim. Yeah,
I think she still feels that she failed her mother and father.
100%. Yes, I agree with you. She feels at the end, in fact, she says, I was just a young woman trying to do the right thing. She's using a lot of Père Clément's language, she says. In the end, though, I got it all wrong. And she explains that she lost the people she loved the most, and she's filled with such guilt that her mother was killed on her behalf, right? And that she lost Remy, and that Remy died. She believed that Remy died never knowing that actually she was choosing to be with him, and that she would have married him. And so she feels all of this great sense of loss. What did you think about the ending? Did you find it satisfying? What did you think about the ending? When I say the ending, this scene at the end when she reclaims the book. By the way, that librarian that's fictional in the story is actually based on a real person in Berlin who's trying very hard to reunite these books to their rightful owners, as are people doing that with the art, right? All of the art that was stolen and looted. Now they're trying to reunite the art as well, and now with books to their rightful owners. But at the end, she is working on this, showing the librarian the code, and Remy shows up. What do you think about the ending? Marlene, is that you? I'm seeing somebody.
I just wrote down, I said a little too Hollywood. I loved it. I personally loved it, but it wrapped it in too much of a gold bow, and it's really stretched reality a little bit too much. Yeah.
I
I'm
thought
glad
it
they were
was-
together, but it was a little bit too far-fetched.
Yeah, I agree with you, Fern. I think that it was a Hallmark ending for the Hallmark Channel. And also, I would have liked to have heard at least one child really connected with some closure on that end.
Yeah.
And got distracted by she and Remy, which to me was anticlimactic.
That's what I was thinking, if there could be a sequel to this where we can find out the children's lives and how they try to find them. And I think a sequel would be really interesting.
I like her writing a lot, but I find that it feels to me with her writing like she does really well, and then all of a sudden she throws something in that's unrealistic, and it usually is the ending. It's kind of like her publisher says, you have to have the book to me tomorrow. I'm sorry, you've got 20 pages, fill it up, let's go. And that's the other books I've read. I've liked them all the way until it's like something hits you. It's like, nah, that's really very unrealistic. So yeah, I did like the book a lot, and it made me look into more about the forgers, and it was really fascinating. But I agree with what everybody says. That the first time I read it, I thought, well, this is a Hollywood ending, but I like Marilyn. It's kind of a Hallmark ending.
And by the way, for those of us that are enjoying the Hallmark movies right now, I love the ending because I really was in the mood for these happy endings.
I would have liked to have seen Ben on the steps of the library.
Oh, that's right. Well, Ben, yeah, exactly. But you know what? I have to tell you, it might not be as far-fetched as we think, because think about it. How many times do you read? Now, not so much recently, because obviously so many survivors are gone at this time. But do you remember for years, there were stories about reunions, crazy reunions, people that were finding each other, and lost loves, and siblings that were finding each other, and cousins that were finding each other after the war. So, you know, maybe it wasn't totally a Hollywood ending. It was some perhaps plausible ending. Yeah, Jillian.
Except for, I was shocked that her father survived and her mom
that to
didn't.
me was more unrealistic.
I thought that was kind of all right, because he went to Auschwitz, like he was taken right from the beginning. And the fact that the mom didn't even know that the father like that was kind of so sad to me. But I mean, I kind of like, I mean, it is a Hallmark Hollywood thing, but when else would he have met up with her if it weren't because they both saw the article at the same time? So I thought that was kind of like smart. Like
But that would have been the reason why they were brought together.
Right.
And the one
Right,
thing,
because it was, they both saw the article and they saw that book. So, I mean, it was nice.
Can I ask a question? I had to leave for a few minutes. Did you discuss the meeting at the library where they were supposed to meet? Did you discuss that? Because he said you got the wrong library. What did that mean?
I think he was making a joke. I don't want to say a joke, but he was saying at this point they were meeting at the Berlin library and they were really meant to have met at the Parisian library, right?
Right.
And so I think that's really what he was getting at. It's just that they were meeting on at a library, the wrong library at the wrong time, you know?
I see. But it wasn't that she went to one library and he went to another one in Paris. It wasn't that.
No. I think he was just referring to the fact that they were meeting at a library.
Okay, meeting at the top of the world. What is it? The Empire State Building.
You're thinking of Cary Grant and Deborah.
Cary Grant.
Yeah.
They also went to the Paris library separately, but they just never hit it at the same time.
They were a year apart, right? She left in 1946 and he shows up in 1947. And by the way, that was not unusual that they really could not find each other in that span of time. You know, there was the Red Cross lists. I mean, when you talk about what happened after the war and people just couldn't, it was not that unlikely.
And Remy was injured and he didn't recover that fast either.
Right. And she finally, you know, she would have continued going, except if you recall, her father is the one who says to her, you have to get a life. You really have to. Yeah. So what would you say is the takeaway message from the book? What would you say is the takeaway message?
There's good in everybody and there's evil in everybody.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Yeah. What else?
I agree with that 100%. I was going to say you cannot judge any book by its cover. We make these sweeping generalizations about what these kind of people are like or what those kind of people are like. That's not fair and it's not true. I agree, Sue, 100%.
It's so funny that you said you can't judge a book by its cover. I was just going to say that because when I started reading this, I stopped for a while. I don't like to read about the Holocaust. It really bothers me, but I'm so glad that I read this book. It was so fascinating.
Right. It's a whole other part of the whole idea of the forgers. And again, historical fiction, what's so wonderful is how much you learn. We learned so much from this, right?
Right.
Stuff that we had not really thought about before.
Everyone has a story, and we are all reaching that age of invisibility. And we tend to place that on other people that we meet. And we got to realize that there's artists and interesting, talented people in their 80s, in their 90s, who only welcome the opportunity to share their past with you. And I would love to see high school students in more dialogues with these people. They would learn so much. And we just got to look at people and see what's inside and not on the outside. That's it.
Right. Roberta, did you have something to add to Fern? Yeah. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I just wanted to say I have to leave. Happy, healthy New Year to everybody. Stay well. Hope to see you all again.
Okay, I hope so. Let me share with you the author's takeaway message here, because this is what she says. She wants people to understand that no one can take away who you are. It has nothing to do with names. By the way, I was thinking to myself, many of us do not have our original names from Europe or from wherever our parents immigrated from, or our grandparents or great-grandparents. So many of the names were changed. So the names don't really mean anything. It says because your true identity lies within your heart, and that within all of us, there is endless possibility to do good in the world, to find our way in the darkness, as long as we have the courage to follow our hearts. So that's the way the author wants us to have that takeaway message. So any other thing? Did we leave anything out? Was there anything else anyone wanted to discuss about the book? There's a trove of stories from the Holocaust. And of course, all of these authors do love writing about World War II stories because there's so much to them. Any other thoughts that anyone wants to share? So glad to have been with all of you. Are we okay time-wise? Debbie is usually cutting me off at this point.
No, we're all good. It's just about, we're right about on time. So I just
Okay.
want to say I'm wishing everybody a very happy, healthy 2022. And we look forward to seeing you all at our first book discussion of the new year on January 18th. And we hope that you will continue to join us every month throughout 2022. And stay tuned. I mean, we are definitely going to be staying virtual in January. We'll see what happens as we go forward. But we hope either in person or virtual that you enjoy reading and you enjoy coming back here. And we really thank our friends at the Sterling Road Library because that partnership is so important to us. And we love sharing this program every month with them. So thank you guys for being such an important part of this, and happy, healthy.
Let me add my best wishes for everybody, a happy and most of all, a very healthy, everybody stay safe and healthy 2022.
Yes.
And we'll look forward to many, many more wonderful book clubs that we can share together because it's just really a joy every month to be with you guys. So thank you all. And it should just be happy, healthy new year and a wonderful Christmas to all of you. Okay.
And of course, Lynda, major thank you. Major thank you, Lynda, everybody. Hands up, clap, high five, Lynda. Yay.
Okay, well, let me clap for you. Okay.
Thank you guys.
Great.
Very good. Happy
Thank
New
you,
Year to
Linda.
everyone.
Lovely to be with everybody. Be well, guys. Look forward
Bye-bye.
to next
Be well.
month. See you next month.
Next month.